Tommy Reese. I got nothing against Tommy, but come on, guys. I mean,
you're just not gonna be excited.
Tommy Reese is the head coach for the Cleveland Browns. We don't need an experiment. We need, like you said, we need a bona fide coach that's been there, done that, and we need someone.
For this young generation.
Someone like I don't have a problem with them interviewing Jim.
Right.
Here's some names.
Who speculates on what he's heard about Harbaugh's prerequisites to even be interested in your job.
Okay.
$20 million a year.
Not a problem.
Not a problem. $10 million assistant coach budget.
Not a problem.
Okay. Total authority over the roster. And also would like to select his own guy to lean on, personnel guy.
Okay, so would he be making the draft picks? Like, you're going to ask this guy? That kind of makes me feel uneasy. Does he want more say over the roster than what he had in Baltimore?
Yes.
Ooh.
Which would be a total change in the structure here. I think there are 4 definite candidates for Harbaugh to end up with. Cleveland now is, I think, 4th.
Okay.
Miami.
The Giants.
And Atlanta.
So Browns fans are calling for heads to roll, and one name keeps coming up that nobody saw coming. Bubba Ventrone, the wide receiver coach. And when you look at what happened this season with the amount of drops, the interceptions off tipped balls, the lack of separation, the timing issues, it's starting to make sense why people are uncomfortable. And now with Kevin Stefanski gone, with the whole regime getting flipped, Bubba's name is sitting there in the middle of all this noise, and people want answers. Because here's the thing, we watched this season, right? We saw balls hit receivers in the hands, we saw them bounce off chests, we saw routes get run sloppy, we saw miscommunication that led to picks that weren't even Shedur's fault. And when you start adding all that up, when you start looking at the film, at the stats, at what actually went down game after game, you gotta ask what's going on in that wide receiver room. Who's coaching these guys? Who's responsible for the development? And that name. Bubba Ventrone. Now listen, I'm not saying this man woke up every day trying to mess things up. I'm not saying there's some grand plan or conspiracy here, but what I am saying is this. When your receivers can't catch, when your QB's stats are getting tanked because balls are hitting hands and bouncing into defenders' arms, when you got a first-round rookie quarterback trying to prove himself and his own weapons are letting him down week after week, somebody gotta be held accountable. And that somebody is the position coach. Let's be real, coaching matters, development matters. If you got talented receivers who aren't producing, if you got guys running the wrong routes, if you got timing issues that never get cleaned up all season long, that's a coaching problem. That's not just bad luck. That's not just players having an off year. That's a failure at the developmental level. And Bubba Ventrone, he's the wide receiver coach. That's his job. That's what he gets paid to do. So when fans start saying, wait, how does this man still have a job? When they're asking, shouldn't he have been fired with Stefanski? When they're looking at the tape and connecting the dots, I get it. I completely get it. Because from what we've seen, from the footage that's out there, from the numbers that don't lie, the wide receiver room was a disaster this season. And somebody's gotta answer for that. Now let me walk y'all through how we even got here. Because this didn't happen overnight. This has been building. The Browns drafted Shedur Sanders. Huge pick, massive expectations. The kid came in with a ton of hype, a lot of eyes on him, pressure from day one, and everybody knew the supporting cast wasn't elite. The offensive line had issues, the run game was inconsistent, but the receivers, on paper, there was talent there. Maybe not superstar level, but enough to work with. Enough to develop a young quarterback. But then the season starts, and we start seeing the same problems over and over. Drops, miscommunication, routes not being crisp, separation not happening, and it's not just one guy, it's multiple receivers. It's a pattern, it's systematic. And when you got a rookie QB trying to build chemistry, trying to learn the NFL game, trying to develop timing with his targets, and those targets keep letting him down, that's a problem that goes beyond individual talent. That's a coaching issue. Because here's what we know from watching the games, from the All-22 film that's available, from what analysts have broken down. Shedur would make the right read, he'd deliver the ball on time, the ball would hit the receiver in the hands, and then drop, or the ball would be tipped. And because the receiver wasn't securing it properly, it'd float up into the air, and a defender would grab it, and now that's an interception on Shedur's stat line, even though he did everything right. And this happened multiple times. This wasn't a one-off thing, this was a recurring issue throughout the season, to the point where people started looking at Shedur's interception numbers and saying, wait, how many of these were actually his fault? And when you go back and watch, when you really break it down, a significant portion of those picks came off receiver errors, drops that turned into tips, routes run incorrectly that put the ball in the wrong spot, miscommunication that left defenders wide open. So now you got a situation where your rookie quarterback's development is being stunted. His confidence might be getting shaken, his stats are getting destroyed, and the coaching staff responsible for fixing these issues, they're not fixing them. Week after week, same problems, no improvement, no adjustments, no accountability. And that's where Bubba Ventrone comes in. Because if you're the wide receiver coach and your room is underperforming this badly, if your guys are making the same mistakes in week 15 that they were making in week 3, if there's no visible development or improvement, What are you doing? What's the plan? How are you coaching these guys? What are you teaching them in practice? These are fair questions. These aren't attacks. These aren't conspiracy theories. These are legitimate concerns based on observable performance. And Browns fans, the media, people who cover this team closely, they're all asking the same thing. How is Bubba Ventrone still employed? Now, to be fair, let's add some context here. This isn't excuses, this is just reality. The Browns as an organization have been a mess. The front office situation has been unstable. There's been drama with ownership, drama with the GM, drama with coaching staff, so it's possible Bubba got lost in the shuffle. It's possible he wasn't a priority because there were bigger fires to put out. But that doesn't mean he shouldn't be evaluated. That doesn't mean he gets a pass. Because at the end of the day, results matter. And the results from the wide receiver room this season were unacceptable, especially when you consider what was at stake. You got a franchise quarterback you just invested a high draft pick in. You got a fan base that's desperate for competent football. You got a city that hasn't had sustained success in decades. And your wide receivers are out here dropping passes, running sloppy routes, and costing your rookie QB games. That's unacceptable. And here's the uncomfortable part. Some people are starting to connect dots that make them uneasy. Not saying there's proof of anything. Not saying there's some grand scheme. But when you got a coaching staff that seemed to mismanage Shedeur in various ways, when you got decisions that didn't make sense, when you got a rookie QB who was clearly talented but kept getting put in bad situations, and then you add in the wide receiver issues on top of that, it raises questions. Like, was there proper support for Shedeur's development? Was the coaching staff truly invested in making him successful? Or were there other priorities, other agendas? I'm not saying I know the answer. I'm saying people are asking. And when fans start asking these questions, when media members start poking around, when former players start commenting on how unusual some of these decisions were, that's when things get uncomfortable. Because developing a young quarterback is serious business. It's not just about throwing him out there and hoping for the best. It's about putting the right pieces around him, coaching him up properly, making sure his supporting cast is coached up properly, making sure the game plan fits his strengths, making sure mistakes are corrected and not repeated week after week. And from what we've seen from the outside looking in, it doesn't feel like Shedeur got that full level of support. It feels like there were breakdowns at multiple levels. And the wide receiver coaching, that was one of the most obvious breakdowns. That was visible every single week. That was quantifiable. That showed up on tape and in the box score. So when Kevin Stefanski gets fired, when the regime gets cleaned out, when the Browns are supposedly making a fresh start and Bubba Ventrone is still there, that's weird. That raises eyebrows. That makes people wonder what the criteria is for accountability in that building. Now let's talk about what the fans are saying, because the fans notice everything. They watch every game, they suffer through every mistake, and they're not holding back on Bubba Ventrone. On social media, on fan forums, on Browns Nation websites, people are calling for his job. They're not being subtle about it either. One fan straight up said, "Wait, he still has a job," like genuine shock that this man survived the purge. Another fan pointed out that Andrew Berry, the GM, might have been the one who hired him or approved him, so there's politics involved. But the consensus is clear. People want change, people want accountability, and Bubba Ventrone is a name that keeps coming up. And it's not just random fans either. Media members who cover the Browns, people who have access to the building, insiders who hear things, they're asking the same questions. Why is he still there? What's the justification? What has he done to earn another year? Because based on performance, based on results, there isn't a strong case to keep him. Now here's where it gets interesting. The Browns just signed some new wide receivers, reserve future contracts. Guys like Isaiah Wooden, brought in from the CFL, spent time with a couple NFL teams. They're making moves to add bodies to the receiver room, which tells you they know there's a problem. They know that room needs help. They know they need more talent, more depth, more options for Shedeur moving forward. But here's the question. If you know the receiver room is a problem, if you're actively trying to fix it by bringing in new players, why wouldn't you also fix the coaching? Why bring in new talent just to have them coached by the same guy who couldn't get production out of the previous group? That doesn't make sense. That's like buying new ingredients but keeping the same chef who kept burning the food. And this is what makes Browns fans nervous, because it feels like the organization is addressing symptoms but not the root cause. Yeah, bring in more receivers, great. But if Bubba Ventrone is still coaching them the same way, running the same system, teaching the same techniques that didn't work this year, what's gonna change? How is next season gonna be different? Two things can be true at once. The receivers this past season might not have been elite talent, and Bubba Ventrone might not have developed them properly. Both of those things can be true, but only one of those things is directly controllable by the coaching staff, and that's the development part, that's the coaching part, that's Bubba's job. So when people say he should have been fired with Stefanski, I get it. Because if you're cleaning house, if you're trying to build something new, if you're serious about supporting Shedeur Sanders and maximizing his potential, you gotta have the right coaches in place. You gotta have coaches who can develop talent, coaches who can scheme guys open, coaches who can teach proper technique, coaches who can hold players accountable and get results. And based on what we saw this season, it's fair to question whether Bubba Ventrone is that guy. It's fair to wonder if he's the right fit for what the Browns are trying to build. It's fair to ask if Shedeur deserves better coaching support at that position. Now let's talk about Shedeur for a second, because through all this mess, through all the drops and the miscommunication and the chaos, the kid showed toughness. He showed composure. He didn't throw his receivers under the bus publicly. He kept working. He kept trying to build chemistry. He took responsibility even for mistakes that weren't his fault. That's leadership. That's maturity. That's what you want from your franchise quarterback. But there's only so much a quarterback can do when his supporting cast isn't executing, when balls are hitting hands and getting dropped, when routes aren't being run correctly, when the timing is off because receivers aren't where they're supposed to be. At some point, the talent around him has to step up. The coaching has to step up. The organization has to step up. And this is where the Bubba Ventrone situation becomes more than just about one coach. It becomes about the culture. It becomes about accountability. It becomes about whether the Browns are serious about doing right by their young quarterback. Because if you're not willing to make tough decisions, if you're not willing to hold coaches accountable for poor performance, if you're letting politics or personal relationships get in the way of what's best for the team, that's a problem. That's a red flag. Shedeur Sanders is talented. We've seen what he can do when things are clicking. We've seen the arm talent, the decision-making, the poise under pressure. But he needs help. He needs receivers who can catch. He needs an offensive line that can protect. He needs coaches who can put him in position to succeed. And right now, with Bubba Ventrone still in that building, there are legitimate questions about whether he's getting that support at the receiver position. Now let's shift gears for a second because there's another story brewing that's connected to all this. John Harbaugh, the rumors, the speculation, the idea that he might be interested in the Browns' job, and apparently according to league insiders, according to people who have been talking to folks around the situation, Harbaugh has some prerequisites, and they're not small asks. $20 million a year, that's the number being thrown around. Which honestly, for a coach of Harbaugh's caliber, for someone with his track record, his Super Bowl, his consistent success, that's not crazy. That's market rate for an elite head coach. The Browns can afford that. That shouldn't be a deal breaker. $10 million assistant coach budget. Again, not unreasonable. If you want to build a championship-level staff, if you want to hire the best coordinators, the best position coaches, you gotta pay for it. You can't cheap out on coaching and expect to compete at the highest level. But here's where it gets interesting. Full control over the roster, the ability to select his own personnel guy, the authority to make final decisions on draft picks, on free agency, on who stays and who goes. That's a big ask. That's a fundamental shift in how the Browns have been operating. That's essentially saying Andrew Berry, the GM, would take a backseat, or maybe not even be there at all. And look, I get why that makes people uncomfortable. You got a GM who's been with the organization, who's made some good moves, who's drafting Shedeur Sanders. And now you're gonna potentially push him aside or limit his power for a head coach? That's a big organizational change. That's not something you do lightly. But here's the flip side. John Harbaugh wins, that's what he does. Over 300 wins in his career, sustained success, playoff appearances, a Super Bowl ring. The man knows how to build a winning culture. He knows how to develop players. He knows how to manage a roster. And if his condition for taking the Browns' job is that he needs full control to do it his way, maybe you give it to him. Because at the end of the day, what's the goal here? The goal is to win. The goal is to build a championship contending team. The goal is to maximize Shedeur Sanders' potential and build something sustainable. And if John Harbaugh is the guy who can do that, if he's willing to come to Cleveland and bring that winning culture with him, but he needs full control to execute his vision, you gotta seriously consider it. Now some people are gonna say, but what about Andrew Berry? What about continuity? What about the structure we've built? And those are valid concerns, but you also gotta ask, how's that structure working out right now? The Browns have been inconsistent. The coaching has been questionable. The development of young players has been hit or miss. So maybe a complete overhaul isn't the worst thing. Maybe bringing in someone like Harbaugh with full authority is exactly what this organization needs. According to what's being reported, there are 4 teams potentially in the mix for Harbaugh. Cleveland is apparently 4th on that list. Miami, the Giants, Atlanta are also in the conversation, which means the Browns can't sit around and play it safe. They can't lowball him. They can't get cute with negotiations. If they want him, they gotta move decisively. They gotta give him what he's asking for. They gotta make it clear that Cleveland is the place where he can build his legacy. Because here's the reality. Coaches like John Harbaugh don't become available often. When they do, you pounce. You don't worry about egos. You don't worry about hurt feelings in the front office. You do what's best for the franchise. And if that means giving Harbaugh full control, if that means restructuring the entire organization around him, you do it. Jimmy Haslam, the owner, needs to figure this out. He needs to make a decision. Does he want to win, or does he want to protect the current structure? Because those two things might not be compatible. If Harbaugh is willing to come to Cleveland and turn this thing around, but only if he has full control, you give him full control. You make it work. You figure out what that means for Andrew Berry and everyone else later. And here's why this matters for Shedeur Sanders. If you bring in John Harbaugh, a proven winner, a coach who knows how to develop quarterbacks, who knows how to build an offense, who knows how to put players in position to succeed, that changes everything. That gives Shedeur the best possible chance to reach his potential. That gives Browns fans real hope that this isn't just another false start. But if the Browns fumble this, if they let Harbaugh go to another team because they weren't willing to meet his demands, if they choose organizational politics over winning, that's a problem. That's a signal that this franchise still doesn't get it, that they're still not serious about doing what it takes to compete. And that brings us back to Bubba Ventrone. Because in the context of all these bigger organizational questions, his status becomes even more significant. If you're bringing in John Harbaugh with full control, he's gonna evaluate the entire staff. He's gonna make decisions about who stays and who goes. And you better believe he's gonna look at the wide receiver room, at the drops, at the lack of development, at how poorly that position group performed. And he's gonna ask the same questions everybody else is asking. Why is Bubba Ventrone still here? So maybe that's the silver lining in all this. Maybe Harbaugh coming in, if it happens, means a complete reset, means real accountability, means the right coaches for Shedeur's development, means an organizational structure built around winning, not politics or personal relationships. But we're not there yet. Right now, Bubba Ventrone still has a job. Right now, the Browns are still figuring out their coaching situation. Right now, there are more questions than answers, and Browns fans are sitting here watching, waiting, hoping that the people in charge make the right decisions this time. Because here's what we know. Shedeur Sanders deserves better than what he got this season. He deserves receivers who can catch. He deserves coaches who can develop those receivers. He deserves an organization that's fully committed to his success. And whether that happens depends on the decisions being made right now, on whether Bubba Ventrone gets held accountable, on whether the Browns land John Harbaugh, on whether this franchise finally gets serious about winning. The pressure is on, the clock is ticking, other teams are making moves, coaches are getting hired, the offseason is moving fast, and the Browns can't afford to mess this up. Not with a talented young quarterback on the roster, not with a fan base that's desperate for success, not with all eyes on them to see if they've finally learned from past mistakes. So what happens next? Does Bubba Ventrone survive another regime change? Does he get another year to prove he can develop receivers? Or does someone finally make the call that needed to be made weeks ago? Does John Harbaugh end up in Cleveland? Does Jimmy Haslam give him everything he's asking for? Does Andrew Berry keep his job, or does the entire structure get blown up? These are the questions, these are the storylines, and nobody knows how it's gonna play out, but what we do know is this. The way the Browns handle these next few weeks, the decisions they make, the priorities they show, that's gonna tell us everything we need to know about whether this organization is ready to win or if it's just more of the same.